Deep in the Egyptian desert, something extraordinary was discovered. It was an obelisk, a huge stone pillar over 22 meters high, bearing the image of one of the most powerful pharaohs in ancient history, Hatshepsut. But there was a mystery about it. The obelisk was covered in strange symbols, a forgotten language from a long-lost past. For decades, experts scratched their heads trying to unravel its secrets. They tried everything they knew, but it seemed impossible. The code was too complex, the symbols too cryptic. Then out of nowhere, a young woman named Dorothy came along, and soon enough she had solved it. But this wasn't some random archaeologist. She was part of a top-secret team of code breakers working in the shadows during one of the darkest periods in human history, World War II. Their mission was to crack the most advanced encryption technology the world had ever seen. If they failed, lives would be lost, nations could fall. But against all odds, they pulled it off, shortening the war and changing the course of history. But their victory remained a secret for decades. Now we know them as the heroes of Bletchley Park, led by the legendary Alan Turing. It was here, deep in the British countryside, where a band of brilliant minds took on one of the greatest challenges of the 20th century. You might think the enemy was the Germans or the Japanese, but it was actually invisible, concealed within a machine called Enigma. This device generated billions of different combinations every second, making it virtually impossible to decipher. Even if you did manage to guess one, by the time you realized it and made the next move, it would be too late. It would have changed. Enigma had already moved on to the next combination, leaving any previous guesses useless. It was a nightmare for the Allies, who desperately needed to read German messages to gain the upper hand. But the Germans weren't the ones who created Enigma. It was actually the British, building it to encrypt their own sensitive information. But once the French fell, the Germans captured these machines, turning them against the Allies. The problem was not just cracking Enigma, but doing so quickly enough. If they didn't get the information in time, it wouldn't be useful. So the race was on. For years, the Germans believed their codes were safe, untouchable, until suddenly they weren't. Messages that once seemed like gibberish began to make sense. Secrets that were thought to be unreadable were laid bare. But how did the Allies do it? How did they turn a jumble of letters into actionable intelligence? It all came down to a man named Alan Turing. He was a mathematician and computer scientist, considered the father of theoretical computer science and artificial intelligence. Though he lived his life under a dark cloud of secrecy, his contributions are a measure out. When he took on the challenge of breaking the Enigma code, the general consensus was that it was practically impossible. But Turing saw a way. He built a machine called the bomb, which was essentially an early computer. It was capable of testing thousands of possibilities in mere seconds, something that would have taken a human mind years. Suddenly the impossible became possible. Of course, that didn't mean they had it all figured out. The bomb had to be programmed to test each possibility, and even then it could only go as fast as its programmer allowed it to. So what did they do? They put more minds to work, creating a whole department dedicated to figuring out the settings for each test. And who did this work? Mostly women. These were brilliant mathematicians who had been overlooked for most of their lives. But now they were the ones who were going to crack one of the biggest mysteries of the era. One of these women was Joan Clark. She was one of the few female code breakers at Bletchley Park, and one of even fewer who worked directly on the Enigma project. While the men came up with theories and built machines, it was often the women who had to figure out how to make it work in practice. They would stay up late after the men had gone home, pushing the bomb to its limits. They ran tests, analyzed results, and adjusted the settings. They were tired, overworked, and constantly under pressure. But they pushed on because they knew what was at stake. With each passing day, they got closer and closer to a breakthrough. Then one night in 1938, it happened. They broke the code, or rather, they found a flaw in the German operator's procedures. You see, Enigma was designed to be unbreakable, but human error is unpredictable. And the Germans weren't perfect. Sometimes they forgot to change the settings, sometimes they left messages with obvious clues, and sometimes they simply made mistakes. When Turing and his team exploited these weaknesses, they opened a Pandora's box of German secrets. The impact was immediate. Allied forces were able to intercept German communications, track their movements, and anticipate their plans. Within months, the tide of war had turned. But this wasn't just a one-time thing. As the war went on, the Allies continued to break Enigma codes, gaining valuable intelligence until Germany's final surrender in 1945. Historians estimate that by the end of the war, the Germans had used around 175,000 different settings for Enigma, but the bomb could test all of them in less than 8 hours. In total, the Allied powers sent 20 million messages through Enigma. Of these, only 3% were caught by the Germans. So you can imagine how important it was to be able to read those German messages. Winston Churchill believed that Turing's work alone shortened the war by 2 years, potentially saving millions of lives. But the story doesn't end there. While Turing was celebrated as a wartime hero, the world he helped create didn't quite understand his contributions. When the war ended, the British government ordered everyone involved in Bletchley Park to keep their work a secret, vowing to never acknowledge its existence. It was a necessary evil. In the Cold War that followed, the West needed to maintain its superiority in encryption technology. If the Russians knew how the Allies had broken Enigma, they would try to build better systems, making it harder for the West to spy on them. But this secrecy had a devastating effect on Turing. He was arrested for gross indecency for being in a relationship with another man, something that was still illegal at the time. He died in 1954, believing that he had failed to break the Soviets' new encryption system. Luckily, his legacy lived on. Others carried on his work, building better and more efficient computers. By the 1960s, they had cracked the Soviets' encryption code, proving once again that human ingenuity knows no bounds. Even today, his methods are being studied and emulated. Modern computers use algorithms to test countless possibilities in fractions of a second. These help us solve problems that seem impossible, from medical diagnoses to financial models. So when you look at your phone or log into your bank account, remember that it is because of people like Alan Turing and the forgotten breakthroughs of Bletchley Park that we live in the digital age. But can you imagine a world without computers or the internet? Without Turing, that might have been our reality. If you enjoyed this glimpse into history's hidden heroes, hit subscribe for more untold stories that shape our world. And if you want to know more about the incredible people who cracked the Enigma code, click on the playlist right up there. It is filled with stories that will inspire you and make you think differently about the world around you.